What's up, everybody? I'm Goobums. I'm back. I've played over 100 games of set 14, and here are the top 5 reroll comps that you will need for the set launch. So, the first comp I have is just Fiddlesticks Reroll. If you guys have been following like PvE streams, it's definitely a comp that you guys will have seen a couple times. It was definitely very popular before the nerfs, but heading into the launch of the set, it's probably still pretty strong. I think this comp is a little bit specific because of like the itemization you need, and there are some certain augments that really enable this comp more than other comps. So I'll be talking about some of the conditions for those comps, or for this comp rather. And you guys just need to know that this comp is really high cap because once you get to Kobuko, it's really really strong. But also, it's a little bit weaker if your spot for it isn't that great. So I wouldn't play this comp unless you have the conditions met for it. And yeah, let's just get into it. So the items you build are mostly just Archangels plus one. The third item, the best item, is probably Jeweled Gauntlet. I've noticed a lot of people build BT on this unit. It's really quite bad because he already has healing. He's mostly not really taking that much damage, and your entire rest of your team is built around kind of like a front line for Fiddlesticks to survive and output damage. So for you to build a defensive item on Fiddlesticks doesn't actually end up making that much sense. And yes, before people ask, Bloodthirster really is just mostly a defensive item. It does give some offensive stats, but for the most part, it's a defensive item. So you're really looking for that double Archangel, sometimes triple Archangel is really good. Jewel Gauntlet, sometimes GS, anything to really boost your damage will do. Your Cho'Gath is equipped with Redemption as his best item, but obviously Redemption builds out of a tier, and because your first couple of tiers have to be for Fiddlesticks and Archangel Staff, you're not always going to get Redemption. So otherwise, you want to build stuff like Warmogs, Spark, or Shiv somewhere as well is also possible. Again, Spark is going to be much better because you don't really have a ranged unit. I put Senna here, and I'll talk about her in a little bit, but you're not really playing around a ranged unit in this comp. So generally speaking, Spark is much better. Cho'Gath, 2 as you get to 6 Bruiser later into the game. So your level 8, level 9 is going to start outputting a lot of damage, is going to start being really, really useful for your team. But for the most part, this is going to be a level 7 reroll comp where you're sitting on level 7, say you go on level 7 on 3-5 or 4-1, and you're going to be looking for 3-star Fiddlesticks and 3-star Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser is not actually all that important. Sometimes like people actually end up going for Gragas. Same idea, it's just, you're really just thinking about like, because Fiddlesticks is my main carry, he's a 3 cost, what other 3 costs can I roll for to make my team stronger. So if you don't end up getting Mordekaiser and or Gragas, it doesn't actually really matter that much. What matters is that you have a lot of Fiddlesticks. So one of the best ways to get into this comp is like, say you have a Bruiser opener, say you have a couple Mundos or a couple Alistairs in the early game, and then you actually have a Fiddlesticks from one of your orb drops in stage 1. And you already have at least one rod or a tier. Ideally, obviously, you already have that first Archangels, because when you have that first Archangels, you can actually get the win streak going, and your early game is actually going to be relatively smooth. So you want to be playing like a techie with that. Sometimes like you have Mordekaiser from drop, and that's going to be really useful. But otherwise, like there are some pretty decent, strong early game techies that you can pair with Fiddlesticks to be kind of effective. And in those cases, then you're off to the races. You're not going to win all your rounds in the early game just because it is going to be difficult to upgrade that Fiddlesticks to 2-star, but it's not going to be so difficult to win rounds just because you'll have your board already, and then because of that, you'll be making more econ, and you'll be able to like smoothly transition to your board, just like a lot easier than you otherwise would be. So as for the augments with this comp, you're pretty much just looking for the single best augment for this comp is Cooking Pot. And the way Cooking Pot works is at the start of each turn, all units holding a frying pan or spatula item grant the nearest champion 40 permanent health, and then you get a frying pan. So the way you want to use this at the start of the game is ideally you have a Fiddlesticks or some Bruisers already. Most ideal is like having Fiddlesticks or Mordekaiser early, and then you just put a unit with a frying pan. It doesn't matter really which one. Let's say for example's sake, it's just Seraphine, and you have the frying pan on this person, and you're pretty much just like continuously giving Fiddlesticks HP for the entire game. Mind you, you're getting 40 HP permanent 40 permanent HP per round, right? So eventually, this Fiddlesticks is gonna say 10 rounds later, 15 rounds later, he's gonna have like 200 or upwards of even 600 HP from this cooking pot. And the reason why that's going to be really impactful is because with this frying pan, you can actually make Bruiser Spat, and in that case, like we're still building double Archangels, but we can make Bruiser Spat, and our Fiddlesticks will be equipped with the Bruiser Spat. And mind you, our Fiddlesticks is 3-star, which already has a lot of HP, and then we combine that with the 600, 400 to 600 HP, extra HP we got from Cooking Pot for most of the game, depending on when you got your Fiddlesticks. and then we combine that with the amount of HP you get from 6 Bruiser, which is like 70%, and then we'll easily see our Fiddle getting to 5,800 is kind of the biggest number I saw, 5,800 HP, sometimes 6,000 HP, like a ridiculous amount of HP, and then with the double Archangels, he's really going to live forever, he heals a lot, and then he's just, he's going to scale out through the fight. Archangel Staff obviously gives you more AP as the fight goes on, and you're pretty much off to the races. Otherwise, you just want like pretty generic stuff. Bruiser Spat is obviously fine for the comp. The thing is, the comp on 6 or comp on 7 exactly plays Fiddlesticks plus 6 Bruisers. So in the case that you have a Bruiser Spat, or in the case that they're level 8 and you don't have anything to play, a lot of times you end up actually just playing any upgraded Bruiser. So if you happen to have a second Mordekaiser 2 on your bench because you're going for Mordekaiser 3, then a second Mordekaiser will do. Obviously, a Mordekaiser is stronger than a Mundo or an Alistair, so it's like pretty safe to play those units. Otherwise, the other example I wanted to talk about was Senna. Senna is very rare. I don't think you're actually playing her all too often. You do get Slayer with Mundo, so it's not completely useless. But I would say the case for playing Senna over something else or extra Bruiser is just that your entire team is built around giving a lot of frontline as it is, because you already have 6 or in this case maybe 5 Bruisers. That when you have Senna, it does provide a little bit of range DPS, which is pretty relevant. And more importantly, Senna gives you an outlet to get rid of your bows and swords. So if you have in excess of AD items, say you're building say you just have 2 bows or 3 bows sometimes, 2 swords, 3 swords, you don't really have anywhere to put those items on your Fiddlesticks, Mordekaiser, and Cho'Gath. And in the case that you don't have any Reforgers, Senna is a pretty good outlet to kind of get use those. It's very rare that you will get Senna 3. I actually don't think I've seen it in this comp. But in the case that you have Senna 2, it is oftentimes your strongest board. So playing, it's not entirely impossible to find yourself playing around it in the early game. And because your front line is going to be so thick, your Senna actually ends up doing a solid amount of damage. Otherwise, something else I really want to talk about is that this comp really hard abuses 2 Ornn artifacts in Blinding Jewel and Sniper's Focus. In the case of Sniper's Focus, you would just drop one of these items. It's rare that you have both Bruiser and Sniper's Focus, but let's just say that you don't. You can actually just put Fiddlesticks backline, and it'll be fine. Oftentimes, I see people put him here, and the reason for this is that he can, he just acts as a backline range carry, and then he ults more units, and he can eventually tether to a lot of people's carries. So say you blow up the left side of your opponent's board, Fiddlesticks will start draining carries in the back left corner. And if you use this to target people's carries, obviously your Fiddlesticks can't really get bursted that easily because he's a 3-star and your front line is so tanky. It's much more common for your Fiddlesticks to start hitting the enemy carry before the enemy carry starts hitting yours. And in the case that the enemy carry does start hitting your Fiddlesticks fairly early, the thing is Fiddlesticks is very tanky. So because he has that drain, because he is at 3-star, most of the times you're out-dueling enemy AD carries or enemy carries at all. And then Blinding Jewel, if you guys know what Blinding Jewel does, it's just anytime there's a unit in the game whose spellcast takes a lot of times. So in this case it's Fiddlesticks, but you guys might be familiar with Karma in the past, maybe Malzahar, maybe Morgana of this set as well, which is kind of a reprint, so you might have seen Morgana in the past. This item just works really well because each individual tick reduces their MR, and by the time they've reached 0 MR, you actually get mana for each individual tick. And obviously, if you're ticking very frequently, then you're going to have a lot of mana very quickly, and you're just going to be spam casting. It's going to be really strong. Everybody's MR is going to be gone, and yeah, you're off to the races. So that's definitely something to note. Again, this comp is quite specific, but if you have some of these Ornn artifacts, say from an encounter, say from an augment early game, then you should definitely be looking for this comp. Yeah, so this comp caps really high, but again, getting into this comp is a little bit tougher. So the second comp I have for you guys today is Seraphine Reroll. This is a 1-cost reroll. I believe this is going to be the only 1-cost reroll I'm talking about today because I do believe it's the strongest one. And I do believe that the best way to play this is with 7 Anima Squad. So for those of you guys who don't know how Anima Squad works, it's a little bit hard to explain without you having ever played the set, but it is also one of the simplest, traits or comps to play around if you're kind of new to the set. And the way it works is that every breakpoint of Anima Squad, at every breakpoint, you get an option of 2 weapons. And these 2 weapons have some sort of effect. The game devs have kind of said that they are relatively balanced, but I do believe that they're not entirely balanced. Obviously, they're we're still early on in the set, so they haven't particularly balanced all of them perfectly yet. But this trait is actually really strong in the early game. So if you have 3 Anima Squad early game, even if you're level 3, a lot of times you'll actually find yourself winning fights, especially if you have that Silas 2. Obviously, you need a upgraded front line to kind of get your board going. But yeah, this is pretty much standard one cost reroll comp. Your level 4 main board is Shyvana, Alawi, Silas, and Seraphine. Oftentimes, because we don't always have access to the 2 costs right away, we're actually going to be playing with Vi to pair with our Silas. Vi is actually a pretty premium one cost unit as a tank. She's quite good at what she does. Obviously, in the case that you want to go for a 3-star, it is possible, but I would not recommend oversinking resources into it just because ultimately you are going to end up with Leona anyway as you kind of scale further into Anima Squad. So it's not all that important to upgrade a Vi 3. That being said, if you're given a Vi 3, this is one of the comps you can actually play. There are a couple augments in the game, such as Build-A-Bud, such as Worth a Wait, that if you land on Vi, you actually can just play this comp. Obviously, in those cases, you can actually just use the Vi to play a lot of other things as well, but it is just, an option worth thinking about. So this comp, the main items on Seraphine are going to be Shojin and like 2 AP items. The AP items can realistically be anything. You'll see a lot of Jewel Gauntlets, you'll see a lot of Morello, you'll see a lot of Death Cap, and these are going to be probably some combination of these 3 are going to be her best in slot. In the case that you have a Sunfire already, obviously you're not building Morello, but Seraphine's targeting is actually very, very good, so most of the time building a Morello on her is quite fantastic just because she will be able to spread that anti-heal to the entire enemy team. Sorry, I will actually revisit how Anima Squad works again. So once again, you're choosing a weapon. I would say for the most part, if you're playing Anima at all, you should really just think about you're choosing the weapon that deals the damage type of the shred that you have. So if you have armor shred in the form of Even Shroud or Last Whisper, then you're picking the physical damage. If you have magic shred in the form of Spark and Shiv, then you're going to pick the magic damage dealing one. And with the exception of 7 Anima, there's going to be a true damage one. All of them do either physical or magic damage. So obviously in this comp, because we're playing a magic damage carry, we are looking for that Spark or Shiv at some point into our board anyway. And because we're doing that, it's pretty likely that we're going to end up just picking all the magic damage versions of this of this weapon when Anima Squad is given to us. That being said, again, it's actually not all that important, and there are actual cases where you should be choosing the physical damage over the magic damage, even though you have magic shred. But once again, that's going to be like kind of the ailment of some of the balancing woes of it being early on in the set. So hopefully as the set goes on, using that heuristic that I talked about, where you're just choosing the damage type that you have, is probably just going to be a decent way of going about it. Yeah, so this comp, you roll on 4 for ideally Seraphine 3 and Silas 3. I'd say Alawi 3 is quite useful if you can, happen upon a lot of them. That being said, most of the time you're just not going to be able to get that around the same time you're hitting your Seraphine. And because you actually do want to be playing this comp when you have a Seraphine 2 early. The reason for that is, again, as I mentioned previously, this comp can actually win even though you're down a level, depending on your items and depending on your upgrades. So say you have Silas 2, Seraphine 2, and an Alawi 1, you're actually pretty likely to win your 2-1 fight most of the time, especially if you have a slammable item. All these items that I put on screen are pretty strong in the early game. Obviously, defensive items are quite strong in the early game for obvious reasons, and Seraphine is just a fantastic unit in the early game. So if you do happen upon that, then you will be able to win some of those early fights. Otherwise, you can just lost streak into this comp, but I would say it's slightly less consistent just because of the sheer early game power that you have with this comp. And when you scale up with this comp, it's actually fairly simple. You're pretty much just playing vertical Anima Squad the entire game. So this is your level 4. As you go to level 5 and level 6, then you're just adding Vayne, you're adding Yuumi, and boom, that gets you 5 Anima Squad. As you get into the late game, 7 and 8, you're putting in Leona and Xayah. Sometimes in certain encounters, you'll have a lot of extra items. So say your Seraphine's already itemized and your Silas is already itemized, say random tank item, doesn't actually really matter. Then you're going to start itemizing your Leona. And Leona 2 is probably already stronger than Silas 3. So in the case that you have a Leona 2 early, or say you don't even have a Silas 3, then putting items on Leona is going to be very effective. Her best item is going to be mana items, and the reason for that is, so she's a 50 out of 110 mana unit, and Val specifically is very strong on her. And the reason for that is because her ability doesn't gain her any flat HP. So what I mean by that is, like, say we take Alawi, for example, she heals on her cast. Say we take Silas, for example, he heals on his cast. And a lot of these units will, give a shield to their cast. So it doesn't actually matter when you use it, but the way Leona works is she gains a lot of durability for her cast. So you really want this durability to be timed in a way that, like, Leona isn't losing all of her HP before her cast goes off. Because then in those cases, like say the enemy carry has casted and Leona hasn't, then Leona's going to take a bunch of damage that she otherwise wouldn't have had she ulted sooner. So you really want to be stacking these mana items on Leona if at all possible. Granted, your first mana item almost always has to be a Shojin, so you do have to be cognizant of saving your tears. And your second mana items, especially if you don't have a Spark yet, is going to be really nice if you get that Shiv, once again for that shred. So, but otherwise, yeah, Leona, you just want mana items on her. You don't want to have 3 mana items on her, but like, other generic tank items are going to do fine. Leona 2 is very strong. And finally, if you get to, say, Xayah 2 and you have a leftover amount of swords and bows, then you can form Xayah items. She's a standard ADC. She's not an attack speed carry, so, Guinsoo's not going to be fantastic on her. It's not unbuildable on her, but it's not going to be fantastic on her. So you're definitely going to be focused around building sword items for her. And if we look at the rest of our team, we only need Shojin. So, being able to use leftover swords for an alternate carry as the game goes on is going to be pretty important. And Xayah is a pretty strong 2-star unit as you get to level 8 and level 9. Aurora is also the 5 cost for this comp, so eventually Vayne is normally the one that gets dropped, assuming you don't have a spat. So Aurora, the way she works is she pulls in a unit from your bench. And Aurora is probably the strongest max cap unit in the game. And what I mean by that is Aurora herself is already, at least a 4 or 5 cost level of power in terms of just her ability. But her ability to pull a unit in from your bench also offers a lot of capping abilities to your board. And what I mean by that is that say you have a Kobuko 2 on your bench and you swap Kobuko into your board with Aurora, then you just have a unit that's like a 2-star potentially, just CCing the entire enemy team on top of having an Aurora, right? So as you get to late game, level 9, level 10, with this comp, you're definitely going to be looking for some good benchiness to throw in. With Aurora, I would specifically recommend Kobuko is probably the single best one, but also Urgot is fantastic, and in some cases Viego is pretty good. Any 2-star 5 cost is probably going to be really strong, with the exception of something like a Samira, just because you won't really have items for her. And as for 2-star 4 costs, Sejuani is also going to be really, really good. Just pretty much anyone that provides some sort of CC is going to be quite good. Even in the case of like, in the mid game, say you randomly have a Braum 2, say like that's your Vanguard of choice. On say that you're level 6, and then on level 7 you happen upon an Aurora. Pulling in your Braum 2 from your bench for the entire game is going to be very, very strong for your mid game, but it isn't going to be your end game pull in because again we are going to be looking for those 5 costs. And in the case where we don't have Morello on Seraphine, so we have Jewel Gauntlet instead, maybe our death cap is a Guard Breaker, it's classic spell crit combo with Guard Breaker GG, then Aurora is a fantastic holder for our Morello because she does hit biggest line. She has even smarter targeting than Seraphine, and yeah, it's going to be a great way to scale up. And a lot of times you will be able to win with this comp. A lot of times you won't be able to win with this comp. It does depend slightly on how early you hit your Seraphine and how early you can scale into your Leona 2s, Xayah 2s, and Aurora 2s, and even the upgraded, maybe 5 cost on your bench for Aurora as well. Finally, if you get to like level 9, you can play one more unit on top of this, which is generally going to be Jhin. And this is going to be true for any Anima Squad thing, just because Jhin pairs perfectly with Aurora and Xayah, gives Marksman, gives Dynamo. Dynamo is a fantastic team-wide trait just because it gives mana to your whole team, not just Dynamos. So this is a fantastic splash trait to put in. And Marksman is obviously good because, you want your Xayah to be 2-star, you want your Xayah to have some items. And yeah, that's this comp. Next up, I have Reroll Executioners. I'm not entirely certain how strong this comp is relative to some of the other comps that exist in the game, but I do think that my experience with this comp is that I'm very successful. This comp actually got nerfed several times throughout the PvE cycle, but I think it remains like a powerhouse if you have the right conditions to play it. And okay, so first of all, what is this comp? You're mostly rolling on 6 and 7 to 3-star your Graves, Rengar, and Varus. And the reason why for this comp I say 6 and 7 rather than say in the other comps I'm saying one specific level is because you really want to use this comp as a way to scale Graves. You want to scale into this comp, by playing Graves 3, and then eventually you'll find Rengar 3 and Varus 3 once Graves 2 and Rengar 2 are really kind of like keeping you stable, and then obviously Graves 3 is going to be really strong. It's going to be a little bit tricky to kind of like get all that, but pretty much the conditions for playing this comp early is just having an Alistar and a Graves in the early game. So if you have a Graves on stage 2, he's actually really, really strong as an item holder. If you give him your items, he's just a really strong stage 2 board. But the reason why you really want to have this early is just because of this Golden Ox trait. You might hear me call it Ox Force from now on, just because that's what it used to be called in the past. But Golden Ox, the way this trait works, is you want to be incrementally spending your money every turn to get the breakpoint for damage amp applied to your Golden Ox units. So the reason why it's very nice to have Alistair and Graves in the early game is not only because that forms a really strong early game board, but you can really kind of get that Golden Ox snowballing. And for every kill that Graves gets in the early game, there's a chance for you to get drop gold. And for those of you guys who aren't aware, gold in the early game is very, very impactful. So if you get that gold snowball early, say Graves just gets you 1 or 2 gold in the first couple of rounds, that gold actually snowballs quite dramatically. As for items, this comp is fairly simple. The best item on Rengar by itself is going to be Edge of Night and Hodge. The third item doesn't matter that much. I would tell you to refrain from building Infinity Edge and Jewel Gauntlet in this comp, just because this is a question I get asked so often. Is like, you have Executioner or you have an IE already, or say you have Jewel Lotus, one of the augments that grant you spell crit. Why are you not building JG? The thing is, when you already have spell crit, the added effect of getting another spell crit is not really all that worth it. And the way you can think about it is that IE, part of the effect of IE is that it gives you spell crit. So a lot of the power budget of IE is the fact that it gives you spell crit. And if you already have spell crit, that means you're losing a lot of that power budget, right? And I know there's an added effect for if you already have spell crit, but you have to compare that to the effect of IE, and then compared to other items, frankly, it's just not worth it. So yeah, mostly for Rengar, you're just going to build around Edge of Night, Hodge. The third item doesn't really matter. You'll see a lot of GS. You'll see a lot of Deathblade. Any sword item will do, really. Doesn't matter that much. As for Graves, you primarily want to be going for QSS BT. So QSS also grants crit chance, which scales really well with Executioner. So it's really quite nice. Graves is not quite like Rengar, where he doesn't really need this Edge of Night item. Graves is more of like a ranged attack speed unit, which is why QSS will do better. That being said, if you have an augment like Not Today, where you're being granted an Edge of Night like for free, and as well as an added benefit for it, this is a fantastic scenario where you'd want to be putting Edge of Night on your Graves. So otherwise, you want to go BT, Titans, and QSS on your Graves, but it doesn't actually matter all that much, the specific items. QSS is not mandatory. I'd say the only mandatory item is either a BT or a Hand of Justice, just because you do want some healing on your Graves, but the remaining 2 items aren't like the most important. I've seen a lot of Last Whisper. You'll see a couple Sterak's here and there. He's not so much of a tank, so Sterak's is a little bit worse than maybe other kind of like melee fighter type units you guys might be used to, but he is really quite good. As for Varus, he just holds any leftover AP items. As you'll notice between Rengar and Graves, you're not really holding any AP items at all, and there was only, Hand of Justice is fantastic, but like sometimes you might have too many tiers. Varus is a fantastic way of kind of like being an outlet for using some of your leftover items. Most importantly, on Varus, you should be looking for anti-heal, which is going to be red buff or Morello a lot of the time. As you see with Morello, there's not a single belt or rod used on Rengar and Graves, so I'd say probably 8 out of 10 games you play this comp, you're going to find yourself with a Morello and Varus. If we're talking about Varus Bis, it's going to be Shojin, Morello plus a damage item of some kind. Guardbreaker is fantastic, Deathcap is fantastic, Shiv is fantastic just because it provides anti-MR for your entire team. And once your Varus gets to 3-star, you'll notice that your Varus actually does more damage than both your Graves and Rengar in most of the fights. That being said, Rengar and Graves are like kind of assassin types, so obviously like the type of damage Graves and Rengar are doing can be really impactful if they, say, assassinate an enemy carry, but Varus will just be outputting a massive amount of damage. As I said earlier, this comp is mostly a roll at 6 comp, but as you'll see, there's pretty much only 5 units that you really have access to. Obviously, if you hit a Vex on 6, then you're free to play it, but most of the time, you're only going to really have access to these 5 units. And in those cases, a lot of times you just want to be playing an extra Graves 2 or an extra Varus 2, just because you are going vertical in the Executioner trait, and playing an extra 2-star of these units is going to be really strong because not only are they upgraded, but they're benefiting a lot from your traits. Varus does have some utility, so there's something there. And if you're playing double Graves, there is some extra chance of getting that triple gold from Golden Ox, so it's not to be ignored. As for scaling with this comp, you really just want to find your way into Vex at level 7, mostly because you won't have access to it on 6, and then Urgot as you kind of like really scale up. And then as for like outfitting your board once you have all these main units online, so you don't have two Varuses. You want to be playing stuff like Garen, stuff like Kobuko. Obviously, Kobuko's a bruiser, and stuff like Viego and Renekton. Pretty much this comp can abuse almost all 5 costs, so you're pretty much good to go once you've 3-starred your units. That being said, it is pretty difficult to 3-star units and then still have the leftover economy to find yourself going level 9 and level 10 for these 5 cost units, but if you do get there, it is going to be very, very strong. Last thing, Vex item is pretty standard AP blue buff holder, so she has 30 mana, so you want blue buff on her if at all possible. You're not really going to be itemizing your Vex that urgently. She's going to be getting a lot of leftover items from late game carousels, but yeah, it's worth noting. And finally, you do want Armor Shred in some way, shape, or form. Even Shroud on Gragas is fantastic. Last Whisper on Graves is pretty good. Last Whisper on Rengar is not as good. Something that I will suggest as advice is that if you have an Even Shroud early, don't be afraid to put it on your Rengar or Graves if you don't have 3 items on your Graves and Rengar, just because it is a solid amount of stats, a solid amount of relevant stats, because these tank stats actually enable these carries to do really well, and at the end of the day, you're still getting that Armor Shred effect. So you still are getting damage, and these 2 units are just going to live longer than your Gragas most of the time. And then with the sheer amount of removers that the devs are willing to give to the players nowadays, obviously as you get a 3rd item for Rengar, it's very quick and easy to move this over to someone else. As for the augments with this comp, you're pretty much just looking for generic combat augments, just because if you guys are familiar with kind of AD fighter, assassin type reroll comps in the past, any form of like strong combat augment, such as like increasing your tankiness, increasing your lifesteal, increasing your raw damage, is going to be really, really strong for these comps, because the threshold where they either kill your carry or they die before they do it, it's like pretty much the difference between that threshold is so massive that any combat augment ends up being really, really powerful. So I already talked about Not Today, but something to talk about is maybe Sated Spellweaver. These guys cast fairly often. They do most of their damage off their casts, so this is a really strong Omnivamp augment for this comp. Other combat augments that you might consider might be Long Distance Pals, Preparation. There's a couple other Omnivamp augments that they added that I don't really know the names of. There's a couple that give you armor and MR if you're in the front line. Once again, I don't remember the exact name of it, but anything that's a combat augment is going to perform really well with this comp. Finally, Executioner Crest is going to be pretty strong. In the case that you get Executioner Crest, it just enables your 5 Executioner a lot earlier, and the reason why 5 Executioner is really important is just you gain this 12% durability. So earlier I was just talking about like how tank stats on these units are really, really effective. Again, that 5 Executioner spike on this comp is going to be really, really strong, and it has nothing to do with the 5 extra crit chance that you're getting, and it has all to do with this durability. So if you get Executioner Crest, you can just randomly put it. You can even just put it on Greg. It doesn't really matter in the early and mid game, just because as long as you're getting that kind of power from it, it doesn't actually end up mattering that much. And in that case, you can actually still play 6 Executioner if you have Vex upgraded or you get an Urgot. Like, it's completely fine to play 6 Executioner. Obviously, that's a version of the comp that's going to scale down in the late game. But obviously, if you get this Executioner spat on, say, a 3rd carry, in the case of, say, maybe you have a Viego 2 and you put Execution on him, it's going to be really quite strong. And something to note about Executioner spat is that it gives an added effect of where critical strikes ignore 40% of the target's armor and MR. This actually stacks on top of your armor shred already. So say they have 100 armor, and 100 MR, and they're being shredded by Shiv by 30%, so they have 70, you're going to ignore 40% of the remaining 70, which is very, very powerful in effect. So if you have this 2-star Viego with items in the late game, say you get like random extra carousel items, he's going to be very, very powerful. That being said, Executioner Crest is not all too important, because you do ideally, in an ideal game of this comp, is that you're going to hit Urgot, because you 3-starred these under the right conditions, and you'll be able to scale into an Urgot. Alright, next up I have Twisted Fate Reroll. This is probably the single most consistent reroll comp in the game. I'd say you're very, very likely to do well when you play this comp, but that doesn't actually mean it's the strongest comp in the game. And the reason for that is that this comp actually has a little bit of a lower win rate, and by that I mean it's like your scaling for this comp is not nearly as high as some of the other comps. So if you notice in this comp, like, you're free to play any 5 cost you want. I didn't even mention it, but Aurora ends up being pretty strong just because she's a ranged unit. And same with this comp, you end up playing some of these 5 costs that are really, really powerful, 4 costs and 5 costs. Same with this comp. This comp, not so much. You do get to play Aurora, but frankly, as the game goes on, Twisted Fate is just going to get a little bit weaker. So it's not going to be the best for winning games, but it is going to be a consistent top 4 if you can make it there. So the conditions for playing this comp is pretty much you just have a Twisted Fate with a bow early. You do kind of really need bow because Rage Blade is extremely important on this unit. On PvE, people have been largely building Rage Blade, Gunblade. I am skeptical that this is his best in slot. I actually think like going Rage Blade Nashers +1 is fine. Going Rage Blade Shojin Deathcap is fine. Going Rage Blade Deathcap +1, Rage Blade JG. There's a lot of decent builds you can build on him, but the most important thing is you do need at least one Rage Blade. Because I guess the way TF works is that he gains mana per auto attack. So without, with Rage Blade stacking up your attack speed, you're going to be gaining that attack ability power a lot faster. And this is a standard roll on level 6 comp for Darius and Twisted Fate. You want to be putting items on Darius. This is your generic level 6 board. It's just any random bruiser. I don't know why I put Cho'Gath here. Obviously, any bruiser in this scenario actually works. That's just like a random bruiser. So notice like here you're going to be playing Darius with Gragas for bruiser, Braum and Twisted Fate for 3 Syndicate, and then you're going to be playing Kog'Maw for Rapid Fire. There are some cases where you haven't a surplus of Shakos, so you can actually 3-star Shako, but I would say not to pay this too much thought just because it is really difficult to enable your Shako while also enabling your TF, while also guaranteeing that you're going to have defensive items for your Darius. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the Shako, but it is worth mentioning because Shako 3 is reasonable and you will end up playing him anyway in the case of you need 5 Syndicate, and 5 Syndicate is pretty good. So let me talk about Syndicate real quick. The way it works is it gives you like a hat, and that hat pretty much enables like extra added benefits to the ability of the Syndicate unit that you put your hat on. So in this case, most of the time you're just going to always have a hat on Twisted Fate. Late game, you're going to have a hat on both MF and Twisted Fate because you get 2 hats at 5 Syndicate. 7th Syndicate is extremely broken, but mind you need 2 spats to kind of get that. So you're not really going to be seeing that too often, but if you, in that case, just easily play 7th Syndicate. The reason why I put Syndicate Crest in this augment tab is just because most of the time the Syndicate Crest is actually pretty good because it lets you drop Shako entirely, and dropping Shako most of the time it's a Shako 2 with no items is pretty much getting an extra unit on your board. In that case, maybe you can play 4 Bruisers to enable your Darius a little bit harder. Sometimes you're playing more Dynamos with your MF, which is also really strong. So as you get into the late game, you'll just have more options with your comp. Most of the time, if you get Syndicate Spat, you're just going to go ahead and put it on your Gragas because it gives frontline stats. I believe it gives 500 HP or 400 HP and some damage amp. It's just more important to have some frontline for this comp just because your backline is going to be doing enough damage so long as Twisted Fate is allowed to scale with that Rage Blade. So yeah, this comp is like really, really straightforward, honestly. I think it's the most straightforward comp here. And if you play it, like you're just going to top 4 like almost every game. I don't know. I see very few comps or very few instances of this comp buff orange just because Twisted Fate 2 is really, really strong in the mid game. So Twisted Fate is just a fantastic unit to begin with, even if you don't play this specific reroll comp. So yeah, just bear that in mind. As for augments, I don't think there's any like outstanding augments for this comp, which is why I didn't put any. But anything that gives you econ to hit your 3 stars faster is fine, so long as you don't like over index on that. And obviously, as always, combat augments are going to be really, really strong for this comp. Your MF is using generic AD and spell crit items. She is an ADC that only uses her spell, so you're really going to be looking for that IE Last Whisper combo. Shojin is pretty strong in this comp for this specific MF, just because you're not going vertical dynamo. I know some people in the comments might say, oh, you're not really building Shojin on MF ult that often. In this comp, it's actually pretty good, but in other cases, it's also not that good. And then Aurora, just take any leftover items. This Kog'Maw could be changed out for literally anything else. Any other rapid fire. I actually believe most of the time you're actually playing Draven. So Draven's a little bit of a, I guess, overstated unit right now, and it holds MF items really, really well. So if you say you have a Draven 2 while you're rolling for Twisted Fate 3 and Darius 3 on 6, if you have a Draven 2, he's going to be holding these AD items fantastically, and he's going to be outputting a lot of damage. Alright, before we get to the last comp, I'd just like to say, please subscribe if you like the content. I will be back this set. I know this is a reroll comp video, and there's going to be a lot of reroll comps that I'm not going to mention in this video. Some of you guys might point to Nitros or Jhin. Some of you guys might point to Techie in the form of Veigar. Frankly, some of these comps got nerfed at the ends of PvE, so it's not entirely clear how strong they are. And if I also wanted to kind of like put emphasis on comps that I personally tried and personally had a lot of success with. So because some of these comps didn't get nerfed that hard, I was more comfortable playing these comps rather than other comps. But yeah, as always, leave a like, subscribe. I will be releasing another video talking about non-reroll comps, so if you guys are interested in that, yeah, just look out for it. Leave a comment for anything you guys, any feedback you guys have, anything you guys would like to see. And yeah, let's get into the final and probably best reroll comp in the game, and that's Vayne Reroll. The problem with this comp is that it is the most item-dependent comp of all of these comps. That being said, like reroll comps in general are just going to be item-dependent, but this comp, like more than anything else, is going to be very item-dependent. So, Vayne best in slot is Rageblade, Rageblade Hurricane. Rageblade Hurricane Hurricane is also fantastic, but they just nerfed Hurricane, so I think... So Rageblade, Rageblade Hurricane was already outperforming Rageblade Double Hurricane, but because they nerfed Hurricane pretty much at the end of PvE, then it's going to be even more important to get that double Rage Blade online. So in that sense, you're really not playing this comp unless you have at least one bow in the early game. Ideally, you already have a Rage Blade, because Vayne 1 with a standard level 3, 4, 5 anima board can win streak. So if you guys recall when I talked about in the Seraphine section of the comp of the video, if you play 3 anima with classic Silas, Alawi, Vayne plus a random frontliner setup, then you are going to be able to win a lot of fights in the early game just by having a Rage Blade on Vayne. And that'll get you to your level 6, which is generally played as 3 Slayer, 4 Vanguard. Obviously, we are going to be looking to scale into more Slayers as the game progresses, but on 6, the best you can really do is 3 Slayer and 4 Vanguard. And you're going to be rerolling for Skarner 3 and Vayne 3. At all 2 stars, it is better to stack Jarvan. So before you have your Skarner 3, it is better to start Jarvan. And the reason for that is because Jarvan's also a Slayer. And if you read how Slayer works, is that pretty much they gain Omnivamp from their trait. But then if you're at full HP, the excess of your healing gets sent to the lowest HP Slayer. Obviously, Senna and Vayne are ranged Slayers, so they're not going to really be taking all that much damage. Your Jarvan, however, is going to be a melee and is going to be a tank, so these guys will kind of have a mini Gunblade effect for your Jarvan. So just mind you, at 2 star, it is better to stack Jarvan and then you remover the items onto Skarner later. It is rare to have a Jarvan 3, but in the case that like you kind of can go for Jarvan 3, he's not entirely worthless, so it is pretty good. But I would say Skarner is one of those premier 2-cost tanks right now. So even in your other games, say you're not going for Skarner 3 and you have a Skarner 2 in the mid game, Skarner 2 is one of those like really, really strong mid game units that you should definitely be looking for. So basic tank items on Skarner, I believe, again, so he's a Vanguard, you're definitely going to be seeing a lot of these Vow items, a lot of these mana items on these tanks, just because if you're playing an 80 carry backline, you don't have usages for tier for your backline. Sometimes you will build a Shojin, but like it is a little bit rare. So you do want to be building a lot of tier tank items on these units. And then this comp, it's fairly easy to scale. Oftentimes you're just going for Vayne 3, Skarner 3, but you should hold every Senna you can, because going for Senna 3 with this comp is very, very valuable. I wouldn't overcommit to it just because sometimes you just need to level to kind of like fit in more units. But as you scale up with this comp, you want to go for Senna 3 a lot of times. Z2 is really, really strong, especially as you go up in Slayers, and then you're just leveling to put Shaco and Mundo in. Sometimes you should hold one-star copies of these units as trait bots for when you level. Obviously on 6 you don't always have access to Zed, so when you level to 7 you don't always have immediately have a Zed available to you, so you might want to just put in a random 1-star Shaco for that 4 Slayer. Finally, augments for this comp are pretty standard. I specifically put long distance pals in this comp, even though I generally don't like it that much. I know I mentioned it in one of the other comps as well, but this comp abuses long distance pals really, really hard, because Slayer is a trait that gives you flat AD, and Senna has one of the highest base ADs in the game. So when you have long distance pals and you're pairing Vayne and Senna, your Vayne's just going to have a lot of AD, and actually your Senna's going to have a lot of AD too. It's just an augment that synergizes really well with how the trait is structured, so definitely look out for that. Category 5 is fantastic for this comp. It gives you a full Hurricane. Hurricane is BIS on both Senna and Vayne. Obviously as a third item on Vayne, but as a first item on Senna, it's already BIS. So if you can build extra Hurricanes, you're going to be good to go. In the case that you have Category 5, it is fine to drop one of these Rage Blades for an extra Hurricane. But yeah, once again, that's still going to cost you a bow, so it's like not too easy to get that online. But in the case that, some rare cases, you might, want to see yourself going 3 Hurricanes on Senna, especially with Category 5. This is already best in slot without Category 5. With Category 5, your Senna is just going to be doing more damage than your Vayne, even at 2 stars sometimes. And yeah, that's just how it goes. Zed uses classic AD fighter items, i.e. he does want to use IE because he's a spellcaster, But other than that, you're just going to look for BT, Hodge, Edge of Night. The Chinese players seem to think that this is the best in slot Zed. I fundamentally can't really get behind this. I think Edge of Night is like really too good for Zed. But that being said, because Zed is not going to be the main focus of this comp, you are generally just going to be giving him leftover items. So a lot of these times you won't have IE. That being said, you don't have sword and glove usages on these units all that often, with the exception of like Last Whisper for Shred. So sometimes you will be able to get that IE. And this is like another Slayer specific augment that I'd like to talk about. It's just lethal rerouting. It's just like a very Slayer specific augment, as I mentioned, and it's just like generally a good augment. So it's pretty good. It's not fantastic, but it does give you a Vayne. So if you have this on 2-1 and you have like a Rage Blade already, then you're off to the races with this comp, right? And yeah, that is the video. I will be releasing another video, as I said, about talking about like level 8 comps, level 9 comps, stuff that aren't reroll. Hopefully that'll come out just a few hours after this, because this should be coming out right when the set launches, so that you should be good to go. And yeah, I'm happy to be back. Played a lot of games. It's a little bit of a long video, but I do wanted to give kind of like a more in-depth video about how to play the comp like more kind of like detailed, just because it is a new set. Not everyone's going to be familiar with a lot of the stuff. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe, like. If you guys want to see me play, you can click the link in the description to find my Twitch, find my TikTok, all that fun stuff, all my other socials. And yeah, have a good day.